A fome já não nos surpreende. Convivemos com ela cotidianamente, entorpecidos pela realidade que nos cerca. Caso o receituário do Banco Mundial seja seguido, teremos que aprender a conviver com a morte pela sede.
He survived without water for a week. 7 days. He was rescued and documented the experience of thirst. Saliva becomes thick. A lump seems to form in the throat. The tongue swells so large that it squeezes past the jaws. The throat so swollen that breathing becomes difficult, creating a terrifying sense of drowning. The face feels full due to the shrinking of the skin. Many people begin to hallucinate. The eyelids crack, and the eyeballs begin to weep tears of blood. When Pablo Valencia was found, his skin was like purplish gray leather, scratched but with no traces of blood. His lips had disappeared as if amputated. His nose withered to half its length. His eyes trapped in a winkless stare. This is not a film about saving the environment. It's a film about saving ourselves. Because whatever one's environmental, political, or religious opinions, whatever one's race, sex, or economic standing, whomever of us goes without water for a week cries blood. Ancient societies cherished water, molded their lives around it, and even worshipped it as a god. For whatever reason, between 800 and 1000 AD, climate change dried up most of the Mayans' local water supply. Farmers were forced to extend their agriculture into the jungle forests to grow food. There was not enough water for both the crops and trees, so the forests died. The soil eroded. Air humidity decreased. Food decreased. Mayan leaders prayed to the god of rain, but the regular rain season brought little water. The hydrologic cycle was damaged. Life in the cities became less civilized, as the main focus of Mayan life became providing food and water. People abandoned the cities to begin a new life in the forests, in hopes that there was still a sustainable watershed there. There wasn't. But as we enter a new era combining high technology with the demands of global economic trade, we're entering into a unique stage of history.
Water, which is the source of life itself, instead of being common and universal to everybody because we all depend on it, profit is made out of the running of and the delivery of water to people and to communities. Those that have the ability to pay will have access to the water. Those who do not have the ability to pay will go without. And therefore, it's a life and death situation in the final analysis on the basis of profit.
How is our water being polluted? Agriculture uses chemicals to increase farming productivity. Ironically implemented to counter a diminishing water supply, these chemicals pollute the groundwater. Automobile gas emissions pollute the clouds. But perhaps the most damaging culprit is industry. Water pollution has been linked to the rising miscarriage rates in women, lower sperm counts in men, and it is so globally severe that the Malaysian government proposed the death penalty for anyone caught contaminating water.
What we saw today was a river of human sewage. The water smells like nothing you could ever imagine, as much as 25,000 liters per second flow.
Pasan los desechos de los hospitales, de las escuelas, de todo lo que ocurre en la ciudad, que descarga el agua en el drenaje profundo, viene a dar por aquí. Salen incluso pedazos de humanos, a veces de los hospitales, desechos, alguno que otro feto pasa por aquí, perros muertos.
It goes into the northeast where people grow crops that later on are sold in the Mexico City market. So we are being poisoned. Our wastewater is returning to us in the form of food.
There's active polio, tuberculosis, hepatitis. Well, we try and reason with the aliens and, tell them what's in the water and try and get them out. None of the agents are going to get in that water to get any of these aliens. They're just contaminated. We have a gate that we deploy across the river down the ways a little bit, and we'll deploy that gate, and then they'll all pretty much go back into Mexico. We already have a battery of shots that we take here at the local hospital. It's about 18 different shots for if any agent falls in that water to keep from contracting something.
Contamination and pollution of the water systems is creating cholera and water diseases are killing more children today than malaria or AIDS or even wars themselves.
What we now know is that we are polluting and depleting this finite stock of fresh water so fast that we're now mining the groundwater faster than it can be replenished.
It rains. The water hits the ground and percolates into the soil, collecting underground into what are known as aquifers or groundwater. But how much of our finite supply of water is underground? We can only estimate, as there is no reliable method to accurately measure, which is why our growing dependency on groundwater is such an urgent concern.
The fabled Atlantis in the Middle East had a real city attached to it. It was called Ubar. It disappeared and no one could figure out what happened. And then some archaeologists found it. And what they realized is it collapsed into the desert sand from groundwater pumping. Not only could it happen, it is happening today in Florida. Giant sinkholes have emerged, all of a sudden just big cavities in the ground opening up.
The effects are not always evident, as with a sinkhole or lost city. Entire regions can slowly and evenly sink as a watershed is depleted.
Perfect example is where Mexico City is now. There was once an oasis of water. When the Spanish came, they didn't want their new city to look like Venice. They wanted it to look like Madrid. And they used slave labor to cut down all the trees that would protect the water sources and to dredge the water systems. And what happened was that they just destroyed the water table. And of course, that was one thing when there were 10,000 people living there. It's another when there are, maybe 25 million. They've taken the rest of the water underneath the city. The city is literally sinking in on itself, and these great big churches are beginning to, go sideways. And Mexico is having to go further and further and further away from its local water sources, because there aren't any left, to find water.
We now pump approximately 30 billion gallons of groundwater every day.
So long as we pump no more than what is recharged, we are using the groundwater sustainably. The problem is that we're pumping up to 15 times more water from the ground than is returning back into it, creating a global crisis.
One thing that most people don't know is that the world is desertifying very quickly. We are becoming a desert in many places.
Our soil is eroding, simply meaning that overgrazing, winds, and flooding damage the top layer of Earth, essentially hardening it to the point that rainwater cannot easily soak into the ground. Our life source literally slips away from us, back into the ocean through sewers and rivers, draining the land of its moisture and life. Deforestation is a major contributor to soil erosion. Tree roots absorb water and thus hold the watershed in place. When they leave the land, so does the water.
Because the forests that held the water have all been logged. There is no place where the water can be stored. The rain still comes and runs away as instant surface runoff.
But groundwater pumping cannot alone be blamed for our desertification crisis.
Cities are growing and expanding. For the first time in human history, more people living in cities than in the countryside.
We've replaced permeable ground with hardscape, with roofs, with parking lots, with homes.
If it rains and the water doesn't hit the ground but hits the sidewalk or street instead, it can't soak into the ground and make trees. It just slides down the street back to the ocean and makes more clouds. This means that the ground gets really dry and the grass and trees die.
Celosvetovo zhruba 750 miliard kubíkov vody. Tento proces sa odštartoval po druhej svetovej vojne.
There is another problem with increased urbanization, which is our continued insistence to build housing for growing populations that demand more water than local watersheds can provide.
People in the housing development, and they make money by turning houses, and they're very large companies. So their goal is to avoid the water issue that might limit the number of houses they might have.
Instead of adapting our development to the available water supply of a region, we choose to force the world's water supply to adapt to our desired locations.
What dams do is change the hydrologic cycle. They provide water during those months when the natural flow patterns do not.
What's happened is that we built these huge hydro dams mainly to create hydropower and hydroelectricity. And when we've done that, we've done it in a very narrow framework. And we haven't thought about the fact that we're going to need water for other purposes.
In this quest to conquer nature, as some label it, we've constructed close to 50,000 large dams worldwide. But if we are headed towards desertification by allowing too much rainwater to run off into the sea, then is it not to our benefit to dam water and prevent it from reaching the sea?
One of the basic functions of rivers is to carry stuff from one place to another. And that stuff, which is really critical to the health of an entire watershed, it becomes completely and wholly interrupted when you build a dam.
Dammed rivers fail to carry such nutrients and minerals downstream through the watershed, resulting in more soil erosion. Less percolation when it rains, more runoff, and thus an increase in the desertification problem.
When you trap water, it stops moving, and when it stops moving, it heats up because it's this nice warm soup full of nutrients that are not making it downstream. But then those things die, and then they eat up oxygen. All of a sudden, you've got a major water quality problem.
A river is the lifeblood of an ecosystem, just like the veins and arteries bring blood to every part of our organism. When we have choked arteries, that's what's called a heart attack. A dam is the choking of the artery of the planet.
Rich people and people who live in water-rich countries will get away from it longer than people who are facing it now. But the world water crisis will face us all. But if there is going to be one single thing that is going to slam us into reality, it is going to be running out of water.
We see all sorts of fresh water in our lakes and say, well, you know, what's the problem? We've got lots of fresh water. Once you drain a lake, that's it. There is no more water. We have to start focusing in on what is the renewable supply which comes through the hydrologic cycle. We are creating a situation where we have less and less of that renewable supply left. And with the help of water scientists, we have to really start to assess how much water we really do have to work with. What is that renewable supply, and trying to define it. That's the task at hand. We must be able to find out what the limits are and how to live within them.
Water for people, not for profit!
Enough is enough. I see this report as nothing short of an attempt to package poverty for money and for profit.
El agua es un patrimonio de la humanidad, es un patrimonio de los seres vivos y nadie puede apropiarse del agua. Por lo tanto, la sociedad civil dice que aquí no hay acuerdo.